I think Twitch just told me that I'm live. So cool. Hi, people. If anybody is watching, I'm mostly making this for my team so that I can have something to kind of explain some things in case people are interested in how to use Glamorous. So if you have any questions or anything, feel free to hit me up in the chat, and I'll be looking at this to answer questions that people have. Yeah, let's just go ahead and pause that. Cool. 3 people who are watching. So yeah, I've got this Code Sandbox thing, which if you haven't used Code Sandbox, you totally should. It's amazing. It's catered mostly toward React. And if you're watching this, I'm going to assume that like you are probably using React. So anyway, I've got Glamour and Glamorous and a couple other things in here, prop types and stuff. And yeah, it's basically like Code Sandbox is basically like create React app in your browser. It's super cool. And yeah, we've got this app component. We're rendering hello world to our root, and we're gonna start doing Glamorous stuff. So let's look at like the most basic Glamorous thing that you can do. So we'll have my styled div equals a Glamorous div. And inside of this object, you specify the styles that you want. So we're going to leave that as blank right now. We're just going to swap out this div with my Glamorous div, or with my style div. And you'll see that there's like no difference at all. Here, let me get rid of this guy. And yeah, so there's no difference at all between what we had before and what we're seeing now. I'm going to move this over just a little bit. We're going to look at some of the whoops. My computer is like freaking out right now because I've got too many things going on, but let's close this out. Okay, cool. So if we look at our HTML just with that, we have our root here, data React root, class is CSS and nil, and that is just the CSS class that Glamour creates when you don't actually have anything. We'd get the same thing if we pass null here. Wow, that's going to get really annoying. Not going to be able to see that, but yeah, so it basically just means no class or no styles applied here. So let's go ahead and apply some styles. We'll do font size is 20. And if it's pixels, if the unit is pixels, then it's going to add pixels there for us. That's the same thing that you get with like the style prop with React. So it should be kind of what you expect. We could also do 2M here, and then we're going to get 2M. Yeah, so this kind of highlights some of the main key differences between CSS and css-in-js, is that the property is camel case, not kebab case, and the value is wrapped in a string, or if it's a pixel value, you just provide a number. The one exception of this that I found is line height, which is kind of really annoying. If you wanted the line height to be 20 pixels, you're going to be disappointed. I don't even know what that is. It just sets the line height to be 20, which I guess has some meaning with line height. So if you want pixels, then you have to actually put this in a string to do pixels. I don't know CSS well enough to know why that is the way that is. It's just this weird thing. So yeah, let's see what else we got. Let me see if anybody has questions. Hello, Heavy Boy. Sorry, that's kind of a funny name. Okay, cool. So yeah, feel free to ask any questions if you have any. That will be helpful. Okay, cool. So let's say we wanted to be able to have this component be configured. So actually, let me back up. There are a couple of things I want to explain here. First off, Glamorous has a property for every HTML element there is. So we can have an article, or we can have a section, and whatever HTML element there is. See, we have a section there. You have a function to create components. Also, this function, you pass it any number of style arguments. And so we could also pass let's see, color of red, and prettyify that. Hallelujah. And if there's a conflict, then here we'll say color is green. In the event of a conflict, the second one wins. And so if we were to swap these, then we're going to get green. That's nice if you have like shared styles that you're kind of composing together in a single call. That can be really useful. So like you have a styles utility or like a styles module somewhere, and you're importing those styles, and you can compose all of these together, and just the last one wins. And let's see, another thing, this is so like this piece of the styles object is all Glamour. And so if you go to the Glamour docs, there's this how-to MD thing, and it explains how you do a lot of common things with Glamour that or common things that you would do with CSS that you can do with Glamour. It has a bunch of stuff: parent selectors and pseudo selectors and sibling selectors, media queries, and hover states. Bunch of really cool things. Looks like there are fallback values, which I actually didn't even realize you could do, which is awesome. So, and then animations is really cool. You can do animations with Glamour as well. And actually, I'll just show that example really quick. We have an example here in the Glamour docs for animations. Whoops. And the way you do that is oh shoot, I shouldn't show you this yet because I haven't talked about dynamic props. Well, you don't need dynamic props for this to work. So let me fix this up so we're not actually using dynamic props because we don't need that. Take out this return, and actually we'll just do that and that and that and that. Boom. Okay, cool. So this is how you do animation with Glamorous. Is you import CSS from Glamour, and then you use css.keyframes, and then this is where you specify your keyframes like you would in regular CSS. And then for the animation property, you provide whatever you got back from CSS keyframes. I'm not even sure what that is. I think it creates an animation and gives you an ID or something like that. But it's pretty straightforward. I like how explicit that is, that you just pass the bounce keyframes to this animation. You could also, like, if you wanted to not give that a name, like, goodness, you can do all kinds of wonky things. I probably wouldn't do it that way myself because that looks kind of confusing, but anyway, you can, and that's cool. And then we just create this Glamorous div with those styles. So if we really didn't want to name stuff, then you can just get rid of this and put it right in there, and wow, that looks awesome. And we could say background color is green. Would that even work? Yeah, it does. Of course it does, because it's amazing. So yeah, fun stuff. You can do a lot of stuff with Glamour, and all of the things you can do with Glamour, you can do with Glamorous. So let's talk about dynamic styles now. So let's say that we wanted to have the font size be configurable, and we want to configure that based off of props. So this my style div thing that we're getting back from Glamorous section is actually a component, and that's why we can use it here. And the glamorous.section or glamorous.div, these are component factories, or you might call them higher order components. And what it returns is a component that will render whatever it's given, and does some special things with the props and forwards props. And so here, like, we can give it normal props like ID is, not IDE, but ID is high. And then we can go into here and we see the ID is high. But we can also provide other props like size is big. And those will not get forwarded on because React is going to get upset at us. And so, we don't see size as big on this section. But with those props, we can do some special things. So we're going to make yet another styled, or pass another argument. So this styles object here, and that's going to be a function that accepts props and returns an object. And this object is our styles object. So we can say font size, and we'd say props.size is big. Then we'll do 30, otherwise we'll do 10. And so now our font size is going to be 30. Let's make it a little bit bigger. We'll do 60. So if we say, hey, we want it to be big, then we're going to get a really big thing. And again, it all depends on the order. So if I were to put this one here, then my font size actually is going to get overridden by this one. So we'll just get rid of that. Also get rid of the line height so it's not kind of covered up. And yeah, and so that's dynamic props. With styled components, some people like, or the way you do dynamic props with styled components is you can say like color, and then here you have props, and then you can return what you want the color value to be. And this would be in a template literal. We don't do that with Glamorous, and I kind of explain why I think I explained it in the roadmap. Maybe I might have linked to it. It's a won't do thing. Yeah, in number 5. And the reason is mostly, you can read about this later, but it's mostly that you can, it's nice to have a clear separation between what's static and what's dynamic. And so by forcing you to put your static stuff in a separate thing, or not having like dynamic pieces throughout your static stuff, it makes things cleaner. If you really care, then, or you want everything to be dynamic, or you don't want to have static and dynamic separated, then you can just have your like everything be dynamic, and then you just define all of your styles in this function. You can do that, and there's no problem doing that. Cool. So yeah, that's how you use props. And let's say that you wanted to specify like a default prop for this. You wanted the size to be small by default or big by default. Well, there are a couple ways you can do this. First off, you could destructure this props into, like you destructure size out of it. And so let's do this. Now we just have size is big, so that's functionally equivalent. And now we can default this using default parameters or default assignment from our destructuring. We'd say the default would be big. And so if we don't even provide this here, we're going to see the default being big, and then we can override it with small. And now we're going to get really small text. So that's one way that you can do defaults. Another way that you can do defaults, though, here we'll just get rid of that default, is you can say here, and we'll get rid of this. So it's going to stay small because size is not being specified to big. So remember that myStyleDiv is actually just a React component, and so we could say myStyleDiv dot default props is an object, and one of those keys is size is big, and this is just React stuff. And so yeah, it's just like if you were to make your own styled or your own function component with React, that's how you do default props. You do the same thing with Glamorous. You just tack it on. Let's see, another, so we've got dynamic styles, static styles, default props for our dynamic stuff. Now, what if we wanted, if we had this component, or we have some third-party component or something, and we want to style that? So like we can style raw DOM elements, but we want to be able to style our own custom components. Well, let's go ahead and do this. We'll say myStyleD styled div, and that's going to be a Glamorous. And instead of doing a dot one of these things, we're going to actually call Glamorous. Glamorous is actually a function, and we call it with that. And this is going to give us back, this call is going to give us back a component factory, which is the exact same thing that that these things are. These are all component factories. And so then with that, we can create a component out of this component factory, and we'll say the color is blue. And then we'll do my style div, my styled style div. And now these things are composed together quite nicely, where we can provide overrides, we can provide additional like background color is purple, I don't know, whatever. And so we can provide overrides, we can provide additional styles for our specific use case. And yeah, and that's great. I'm going to check for questions. Anyone have questions who's watching? We got 5 people watching who might have questions. I'm waiting just a little bit. I'll come back here in a sec. Cool. Yeah, so that is composing. Let me make sure that I am, oops, that was Gonna go back to the README, just review some things. But yeah, any questions from anyone yet? Nothing. Okay, cool. So let's see what else we got. Oh yeah, of course, definitely need to show you this. So I'm gonna put this inside of a, well, actually I'll just get rid of it. And now we're gonna do something else. So here I'm going to make a div, hello, and close that div. And sometimes like it's cool to make things that are styled and they're components that you can use throughout your app. So you can make a button component or something that has all the styles for a button, and then you could compose that with another Glamorous call to change what that button looks like. But sometimes they're just like really specific to this page UI things that like it would be kind of nice to not have to give those things a name. In CSS, often I've created things that are like container and then wrapper container, like just the dumbest names because you have to give things names with these class names. And I was in building Glamorous, I was really inspired by JSX style, which allows you to not have to give things names. And so we have that with Glamorous. And the way that you use that is you can get these pre-built components off of Glamorous. So we're going to destructure off div, this capital div. So remember, glamorous.lowercase div is a factory component or a component factory. The uppercase div or uppercase, like all of the other elements, are going to be actual components. They're pre-built components that you can use. And if we look on here, we're going to get, again, a div with a class CSS nil. So that's neat. What can we do with this thing? Well, let me bump this up just a little bit. It takes props, and the props that it takes are CSS properties. So we can say color, and actually, yeah, props, blue. And now those CSS properties are going to be applied. So that's pretty neat. And we can do margin is 20, so 20 pixel margin. And we can do, I don't know, what else is there? Background color is black. And there we go. And that's pretty neat. But sometimes you want to be able to do like hover state or something like that, and that can be a little bit tricky. So there's something on all React component or Glamorous components that I didn't show you with the last one, but I'll show you with this. Something special you can do, and that is the CSS property. And this is kind of like the style property, except that it in the fact that it takes an object of styles. But it also allows you to do hover state and pseudo elements and stuff like that. Just like pretty much anything you would do inside of Glamour or inside of one of these calls, you can do inside of the CSS property. And so we could say hover and color is blue. And now if I hover over this, the color changes to blue, which is pretty cool. And that happens inside of the CSS prop. And the other thing with this my style div, here I'm going to put that inside of here. Okay. Is here now we have this inside of our style div. Now we can provide overrides using the CSS property. So we can say CSS and we'd say color is orange. And now this is actually kind of interesting. So we have this my style div and that comes from my style div. And that comes from composing my style div. And that comes from creating a section, which should probably be a div because that's what it's called. But in any case, and with this, we define some styles that say the color should be red, and then that gets overridden by these styles that say it should be green, and then that gets overridden by these styles that say it should be blue, and that gets overridden by this CSS call that says it should be orange. So with all of that, Glamorous kind of hides all of this under the covers, and what you're left with is just orange. You don't get like a million class names on it. You just get orange, and that's kind of neat. Let's see, what else? Yeah, that's the CSS prop. It's kind of cool. There was something that I was gonna talk about. Any questions? Here we go. Anyway, that's fun. Without CSS, we can't use hover from Mario. Correct, but that only applies to the pre-built components. You can only use hover for the pre-built components with CSS. But if you wanted to do like hover with this, then we'd say color is, I don't know, black. Then that works just fine. So yeah, you only really need CSS for hover if you're doing it this way. I think with JSX style, the way that they do it is they say like they prefix props with hover, and that works fine. I don't know how they do media queries. That might be kind of tough, but with us, we can say media max width. I don't even know. Screen. Let's see. Screen max width of 400 pixels. I don't know how to do CSS. I just like coding. We'd say background color red. Or here we'll say min width. Switch that. I don't know. I must be doing something wrong. Somebody can fix me later. But anyway, that is, yeah, that's stuff. Okay, cool. So let's see what else. There's theming. If anybody wants to talk about theming, I don't actually use theming in my apps, and so yeah, this was added by somebody else, and it can be useful for people. Oh yeah, so if you want to create a component, your own component that can be composed in this way. So here we create my style div with Glamorous, and then we compose a Glamorous created component with Glamorous. If we wanted to make our own component or have a third-party component that we compose, then this is what we'd have to write. We'd say function my styled or my custom component, and that's going to return a div. And what we're going to do here is we're going to get some props, and we're going to, and actually I'm going to destructure these props. And I'm going to take children, and we'll render that. My computer is really going slow right now for some weird reason. Children, it's really hard to type. And then the other thing that we need to do is when Glamorous renders a component, it renders it with a class name. And so for you to be able to have your component be styled by Glamorous, you need to accept the class name and apply it. So we're going to say class name, and we'll apply it to whatever element we want. So this element or this component could render several things, and we only want to style one part of it or something like that. But normally this will be on the root, and you'll say class name equals class name. And then you might accept a couple other props or something and do other special things with it. But at the end of the day, you're going to want to take your props and spread them across your root so that you can get like your ID applied and stuff like that. But from there, this is for most, like most cases, this is what you're going to need to do this. And now we're not getting our big size anymore because we're not styling the font, and that's why that's suddenly bigger. But that's the basic idea, is you need to accept a class name and apply it somewhere. And that's pretty much the main thing, so that you can get those styles applied. And then you need to forward on props if you want to be able to expose that. What's the focused icon about? The focus icon helps me focus for time, so I can block specific apps or websites so that I can just stay focused on a task. I don't use it a whole lot, but it was really helpful for a while when I was really under the gun to do something. So yeah, let's see, what else is there about Glamorous? As you can see, I didn't really prepare for this. It was mostly just, let's do this really quick. Oh, another thing you can do that I'm not really going to show. Well, sure, why not? I'll just show it. Another thing you can do is if you want this div to have any other class names, then you can say button, I don't know, call that a button. Oh, and now we are not using that thing anymore. I think I messed up a bunch of stuff. So we're going to do that and that. There we go. So now with that thing rendered, we're going to see also that button class on there. And so that's useful for if you're coexisting in an existing CSS framework or something, that can be useful in that case. Where the reason that I created that feature in particular, though, is I'm working on a project called css-in-js precompiler that will allow you to take some of these static things and replace them with class names, and then you get a style sheet back. And because every single time Glamorous sees that object, it's going to give you back the exact same class name and create the exact same CSS in the style sheet that it makes. And so if it's static, then why don't we just do that ahead of time? That's what css-in-js precompiler does. Is here we take like right now it just works with Glamorous, but you take a div with the font size of 23, and what you're going to get back is this code, and that's what you send to the browser. And then you also get back the CSS, and you put that in a CSS file and send that to the browser as well. And then you had to do a little bit of like if you were actually just doing static stuff everywhere, you didn't have any dynamic things that, or at least things that were too dynamic, because this is even capable of doing some actually really interesting things with dynamic stuff. So like if you're following some good patterns, then you can actually drop the runtime altogether. So if we look at the snapshots here, then we've got some examples like there's yeah, right here. So if you say Glamorous div, and I'm going to destructure the props to big, and if it's big, then we want these styles, and if it's not big, then we want these styles. So if you're doing something like that, then we can actually compile it down to this, where those two things are converted to class names, and we get the styles out of it. So that's pretty cool. So if you're pretty good about how you write your styles to make it so that this tool could read it, then you can actually drop the runtime altogether. You'd still need Glamorous to create the components, but you wouldn't need Glamour. And Glamour is pretty, like, it's not really huge or anything. I think it's under 30 kilobytes, and that's minified. And then you gzip that, and it's like 14 or something, or 10 or something like that. Anyway, something really small. Yeah, but if you didn't want to have that, then this would be really cool. And another cool thing that this thing can do is it can follow references. So you pass it a variable name, and it can even follow like member expressions. So that works as well. And it can follow across files. Mind blown. So we're importing colors as col from styles, and we use that in a member expression, and poof. If you look in the code base, styles exports colors.primary as red, and that's why we're getting that, which is pretty swell, pretty cool stuff. So yeah, anyway, so that's something that you can do, which is pretty handy. Let's see. Oh yeah, if you need to get the ref of like a component, so we have my div, and we wanted to get a handle of that div, or maybe a more likely case would be it's an input or something, you wanted to get the value out of that input or something, then you use this inner ref prop, and that will forward that on as the ref prop on there, and your function is going to get called, and you can get a handle on that, which is great. Let's see. Yeah, other props will be forwarded if they're valid. And yeah, this also works. I didn't show you this, but yeah, that we destructured things kind of like this right here, but you can also do just this, and that works just fine. Yeah, we talked about that. Oh yeah, display name. So Glamorous does its best to give you a reasonable display name, but there's only so much you can do. So you can specify a display name yourself if you want to. Alternatively, you could use this Babel plugin. And the reason that display name is important is because in the React Dev Tools, it'll show you the display name, and that makes things a little nicer. So this is what Glamorous will do by default. It just says, hey, this is a Glamorous button. But we called it My Styled Button, and it would be nice if it was called My Styled Button in React Dev Tools. And so this Babel plugin will do that for you. It just monkey patches the display name so that React Dev Tools has that, which is pretty cool. So yeah, I definitely recommend that. Root L. Oh yeah, so if you have a component here that isn't like created by Glamorous or anything, and you're composing it together, then it's a good idea to specify the root L, because one of the things that Glamorous does is, based off of the root element, it will filter out props that aren't appropriate for that element. And if you and with like glamorous.div or glamorous.article or whatever, it knows what the root element for that is because it created it. But with custom component, it doesn't know, and so you can give it this little hint so that it can filter things out properly. So in addition to that, sometimes you it does render a div as the root element, but it's gonna take some additional props that it does some stuff, and it doesn't forward everything onto that root element. And so you can also provide these forward props that you say, hey, I want all of these props to be forwarded, even though they're not valid HTML attributes. And then there's theming, and theming is really cool. It allows you to specify an object for your theme, and then you use this theme provider, you pass that theme, and then all of the Glamorous components can accept in their dynamic styles, they accept props, but then they also accept the theme. And then you can share the colors or whatever across the application, which is pretty cool. And you can nest theme providers, and the lower one wins in a conflict. And you can also, on Glamorous components, you can provide a theme override, which is pretty handy too. And then there's also a with theme higher order component that you can use that Glamorous exports. So you can apply it to non-Glamorous components as well. And then there's this decorated syntax stuff that I don't get, but some people think is cool. So yeah, if you're really conscious, like size conscious, then you can actually use Glamorous Tiny, which forces you to do a couple of things differently. You can't really do as much, and it doesn't filter out props for you and stuff. But it is quite small. Gzipped, it's less than 2 kilobytes. And then of course you need to add in Glamour, so there's that. But yeah, if you're really conscious about size, and if you're really conscious, then there's Glamorous Preact that you can go look at. The same person who created Glamorous Tiny also created Glamorous React. And yeah, that's kind of size stuff. So here are some examples that you can go look up. Yeah, if you're using Glamorous, I'd love it if you add yourself to the users. That'd be cool. And if you have any examples, then there's like a whole bunch of examples here that I'd love to get more. Yeah. just a bunch of cool things that you should check out sometime. Okay, cool. Any questions? Does anybody have questions watching this? No? Okay, sweet. I think that's pretty much it with Glamorous. I think it's a cool solution. I'm really digging it in my stuff. It helps me work faster. And I hope that it helps you work faster too. Okay, ciao.